Thank you so much to everyone who has presented so far. It's really an honor to be included among such an amazing and impressive group of people. My name is Kalie Stieda. Oh, sorry, that's not my first page. And I'm a settler of German and Lebanese ancestry. I completed my practicum with The Right to Remain, a research collective made up of academics, students, community partners, and tenant researchers who live in the single-room occupancy hotels on Vancouver's downtown east side. The downtown east side is also known in the Squamish language as Kemkemalai, or the place of the maple trees, and is located on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, where I am speaking to you from today. Some of you may recognize the title of this presentation as a play on the title of Heather Castledon, Onyx Sloan Morgan, and Christopher Lamb's paper entitled, I Spent the First Year Drinking Tea, Exploring Canadian University Researchers' Perspectives on Community-Based Participatory Research Involving Indigenous Peoples. What I am sharing today is not a summary of what I produced during my practicum, but rather my reflections on almost a year of SRO tenant organizing with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous tenants. In other words, attending and facilitating meetings with our team of students and tenants, fetching coffee orders from Tim Hortons, Chinese food from Kent's Kitchen, and numerous birthday cakes from Boss Bakery, schlepping film gear, cases of water and televisions around the neighborhood, conversing over fried chicken, responding to health crises, celebrating each other's achievements, and visioning how the Right to Remain wants to move forward, as well as what we are leaving behind. The Right to Remain is affiliated with a nonprofit organization called the Downtown East Side SRO Collaborative that focuses on tenant organizing in the privately owned SROs, as opposed to SROs that are owned and operated by nonprofit organizations such as Atira or the Portland Hotel Society. Uyamguk and Holding Space are two separately funded but overlapping programs run by Elder Rhonda Stevens, whose praxis involves strengthening networks of care and cultural exchange among Indigenous SRO tenants from nations across this land living in the downtown east side. For those of you who are not familiar with single-room occupancy hotels, or SROs, they are century-old buildings with units that are generally 100 square feet in size, shared bathrooms on each floor, and often no kitchen facilities. The SROs have long functioned as the main source of low-income housing in Vancouver. In the spirit of supporting a strengths-based narrative, I will not dwell on the oft-cited statistics regarding the disproportionate representation of Indigenous people who live in the SROs and the downtown east side. In my view, focusing on the percentage of Indigenous people experiencing poverty, homelessness, and poor health outcomes obfuscates the critical spiritual and healing knowledge possessed by culturally diverse Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers who call this place home. Their expertise is a vital component of the organizing work of the Right to Remain, Holding Space, and Uyamguk. The name Uyamguk in Rhonda Stevens' Nisga'a language means the natural force of the raven, and is a metaphor for this unseen knowledge that exists in spite of the hostile colonial forces of gentrification and white supremacy that radiate through the neighborhood. As the Right to Remain is in its last year of funding, my practicum work has revolved primarily around supporting two major knowledge mobilization efforts. The production of a documentary film profiling the organizing work of Right to Remain tenant researchers, both in their buildings and in the community, and the mounting of an SRO tenant convention, which will take place on May 15th and 16th of this year. And you can see in the photos here some of the planning sessions that have already occurred in preparation for the tenant convention. Over the past 10 months, I have struggled to articulate how what I am doing qualifies as public health. When I started my practicum, it quickly became clear that this work was not necessarily, sorry, there's a garbage truck. Close the window. That this work was not necessarily something that could be distilled into a 30-page report, and that it was better suited to a thesis timeline and length. My original thesis project was about influencing housing policy through guided conversations between policymakers and SRO tenants. As I've become more involved in this world, particularly through my burgeoning role with Holding Space under the leadership of Rhonda Stevens, I have felt the need to rethink my research approach towards the cultural and relational work that Rhonda is doing with Indigenous SRO tenants. I have learned that developing and sustaining relationships in this context is challenging, as the lives of SRO tenants are constantly in flux, but that it is essential to nurture these relationships to ensure that my research reflects the needs of the community. On this slide, you will see behind the scenes photos from our week filming the Indigenous programming that is a part of Guak and Holding Space. This slide shows the Indigenous garden on Hastings and Hawks, right beside the Astoria Hotel. And this slide shows the Holding Space elders and knowledge keepers, as well as myself, community researcher Herb Varley, and Dr. Jeff Masuda, smudging and cedar brushing the Regal Hotel on Granville Street, which is owned by the notorious slumlords, the Sahotas. I've tried to be conscious of my position as an outsider in this world and to build my own capacity for working with people from different backgrounds than my own towards goals that they determine in locations where they are comfortable. As a white settler with a middle class upbringing, I have a fundamentally different understanding of trauma than the tenants, for whom encounters with violence and death are daily realities. Despite these vast social and cultural differences, members of the Right to Remain have managed to build authentic and meaningful friendships. I attribute this in part to the tireless work of Rhonda Stevens, whose praxis involves presenting opportunities for non-Indigenous members of the team to connect with the Indigenous programming and circle of knowledge keepers. One such opportunity was an invitation for staff and students to take part in the weekly talking circle Rhonda holds with the knowledge keepers. This invitation was written on a flip chart in the SRO collaborative office, so it wasn't exactly broadcast. But whether by chance or some greater force, I happened to see it and reached out to Rhonda to express interest in attending. Entering into Circle was the first step in my involvement with the Indigenous program. And afterwards, I felt that I was able to relate to the knowledge keepers, some of whom I already knew from the Right to Remain, on a much more intimate level. As I move forward with Holding Space and begin to develop my own relational organizing praxis, the phrase I keep coming back to is showing up. This does not mean overextending yourself or failing to set boundaries, but rather recognizing opportunities for connection as they present themselves and showing up accordingly when you can in the best way you know how to. It also means following the example of the tenants who care for and support each other despite the adversity that they each face on a daily basis. Thank you all for your time, and I'd like to extend my gratitude to my mentors, Jeff Masuda, Danny Aiello, and of course, Rhonda Stevens.